stage right. I'm here. You're there. We worked on that for a very long time, and we still didn't quite get it right. Hello, everyone. I'm going to take out my notes because, you can put your notes on your phone, right? You can put your notes on your phone, but then it looks like you're looking at your phone the whole time when you're doing stuff, which always...
You can just do that.
Whoa, I don't keep anything right there, though. Melissa.
I have
my
no
goodness.
notes.
And
wing it.
I have them in pink. Is that first draft, Illeana, first scripts? Do you get them in pink usually?
Yes, pink is the pink pages first.
Not that we're going to get to all of these anyway, but let's just jump right into it. So, Illeana, is it true?
Yes.
That as you were...
How dare you?
Isn't it true?
Spin the bottle, right.
That as you were kind of thinking about doing this book and planning this book, that you actually moved to Connecticut? Was that before writing the book or right around the same time?
I had the idea of writing the book. I'm part of a film group called Trailers from Hell. We write movie essays. Thank you, Trailers.
Thank you, Hell. Thank you, Hell. Recognition.
One film geek in the audience. But I had written about The Swimmer and created sort of a splash. And so then when COVID...
Splash.
I know, thank you. So when COVID happened and found a lot of time on my hands, as other people did, I started to write about The Swimmer. I was going to do an extended essay about what I considered to be a completely overlooked genre of film, which was films in Connecticut. And as I was writing about the movies in Connecticut with all these transformational plot lines, country living comedies, getting out of the rat race, I found myself at night scrolling through Zillow, looking at farmhouses.
There was an actual gasp from the front row. Real estate porn.
Thinking, maybe I'll get horses, just all the fantasies. And I mistakenly told a friend of mine who was a realtor about this, and the next thing I knew, she had convinced me to buy a total money pit, beautiful house from the 1800s, but I've been fixing it up ever since. And I finished the second half of the book in Connecticut.
But you have a history with that house, too. You had...
Well, that's what
it wasn't just any house.
What was even more bizarre about it was that my house in LA sold so quickly, and my realtor, completely unbeknownst to her, sent me, she said, there's this old farmhouse from the 1800s, needs a lot of work. I had played at the house where I grew up there. The owner of the house, we had been friends. They were like our rich friends that, we'd go over their house and admire their house. And now it was for sale, and I ended up buying it. So.
And you're still working on it.
Yes, I am. So there's pictures. The first picture in the book is me as a child with my ponies, which we kept at that house.
That's really all I wanted to talk about. We're going to sit up here and talk about ponies.
The ponies.
Right
Melissa, growing up in Connecticut, right? I believe your folks lived for a little time in Manhattan, but they wanted to raise their family in Connecticut. How did that shape your upbringing? Did that help you kind of distinguish between my mom and dad, the famous movie stars, and mom and dad, as opposed to if you were in Hollywood all the time?
And there was a sign in front of the house that said they have moved, signed the Joneses or something, that came back to me recently, that somebody had somehow ended up with it. But yeah, they absolutely decided that they bought a summer house, so we would always come back. But we went back and forth a lot, but we really ended up here, and I feel like a Yankee there in Connecticut. But I definitely feel like more of a Yankee. And, Westport, Connecticut was full of artists and writers at the time. So the people that were around us it wasn't movie people. I always say, hey, you grew up with all these movie stars. Not really opera directors. Frank Corsaro was an opera director. Stuart Stern, who took the cover photo of my book and a lot of photos in it, wrote the screenplay for Rebel Without a Cause, was really close to my parents. He's hugely important to the family. And, so a lot of writers.
Going back to like F. Scott Fitzgerald, right? And Zelda, I think.
Yeah, they were there.
Some people say Westport is West Egg or the inspiration.
Yes, and Rod Serling lived there for a while.
Wow.
Yeah, and there's like, it goes, the Silver Mine Tavern when they closed, and I'm convinced that that's where people from on Broadway would go to tryst. It was in Norwalk, Connecticut, and I think that may have had something to do with my parents moving to Westport.
And they would call it trysting. It was actually trysting.
They were trysting. Does anybody know what trysting means?
You know what trysting means. I know. I want to read something from Melissa that you start your book with, actually. You say, they were beautiful, they were movie stars, they were also my parents. Do you remember about how old you were when you kind of figured that out, realized that they belong to you and your siblings, but also to the world?
Very strange. Yeah, it gives you you have a very strange ego development that happens when you have this ace in the hole in your pocket. You know that if you can somehow get someone to ask you what your parents do, that every adult in the room will pivot, and you're 5 and all the attention will immediately be on you. So it is weird. It really gives you an interesting sense about, am I important, am I not important, and trying to figure out. I mean, I'm just ended up in a lucky petri dish. And I'm still, it's like when I go to the hole-in-the-wall camps, that my dad started these camps for kids with life-threatening diseases, and there are now 30 of them all over the Serious Fun Children's Network, that people want to thank me and thank, they say, you did these things, and I didn't do any of these things, but they need to thank somebody, and I could be a post. So I've had to, and I happily send these beautiful wishes to wherever they go. So that's morphed. But I paired that with a photograph of my sister as a toddler, and someone's holding this picture of my mother in beautiful movie star picture, and she's just reaching out. She's in her little footy pajamas. She's reaching out, and it's just such a poignant. Because she wasn't and then there's the next photograph is of my mom washing a dog in the sink in our kitchen. That's the mom that I knew.
There would be those moments, though, where, your mother's dressed like a stripper, but she's also being mom. I mean, that's an interesting thing to process as a kid, I think.
Yeah, it's said, and we lived in a house once, and there was only 2 photographs that we had in our house. We were having baby groups over and stuff like that. One was my dad riding towards the camera on a horse, Western, like a madman. And the other one is my mom wearing nothing but fishnet stockings and balloons. And when people would ask me, who are these people? I would say, they're my parents. And then I would just walk away.
Just drop that bomb and just walk right out. Illeana, I want to talk to you about, Connecticut. The book, by the way, is beautiful, and it makes you want to go back and watch about 200 movies.
So many that I wasn't even aware of, and the ones that where you revisited, the ones that I was.
On top of your amazing knowledge of film, you're a beautiful writer. You really.
Oh, thank you.
And it comes through your love for these films and the things you find. I mean, someone that tries to do this, like the things you find in different films and what they represent. It's amazing. But you think about, Chicago, we got a Chicago crowd here, and there's Chicago movies, and a lot of them obviously have been crime movies through the years. And then we talked a little bit, John Hughes Land, as I call it, on the North Shore, Shermer. There's a few different genres, but Connecticut has all of them.
Right.
What is it about Connecticut that we have so many different type of genres, and we're going to talk about some of them, but in this relatively small state?
Well, that's that's why I wanted to write the book, is that there's this perception of Connecticut as, Darien, and that's only a very small part of the state. And it was when I was writing about the film Stanley and Iris, and again, how do you write about a film that is an older film, and nobody even kind of remembers it. So I wrote about it from the frame of mind of Waterbury. What did Waterbury mean? And it was called Brass City, and it was all sorts of mills, button factories, and clock factories, etc. All sorts of immigrants work there. And so I wrote about the film from that perspective. Martin Ritt, the director, said, I was looking for an abandoned town with an abandoned feeling. And there's so many towns in Connecticut that are like that, where they were filled with blue-collar workers, and nobody thinks of Connecticut in that way. So that was my goal, was to write about the perception that people have of Connecticut, and then how the perception changed from something Hollywood created, which is this kind of idyllic transformational place, to now when you see a movie and the couple is going to Connecticut, you can pretty much assume something horrible is going to happen to them.
Oh, they're in trouble now.
Right.
Can we go back and talk, though, about that first wave of, I think you call them the country
Living comedies. Yes.
Where I guess the idea was you went to Connecticut to, to heal thyself, to reinvent yourself. They were usually people from the city who went to live in the country. That was
Always,
very popular.
It was always a society man, trapped in a loveless marriage, usually. They meet a girl, she's down to earth, she's from Connecticut, and they are transformed by country living. And they decide there's a better way to live, and they do not go back to the city. All the movies end with them deciding to, live in Connecticut. And then as we shift, as I write in the book, it becomes something in the 40s and 50s, it changes again. But in the 30s, it was really based on something that was real. In the 20s and 30s, there were Broadway actors that were getting country houses in Connecticut, and there was this kind of bohemian lifestyle. And we were talking about this also, the group theater, where it was meeting in Brookfield, Connecticut. Harold Clurman, Sanford Meisner, Lee Strasberg, John Garfield, Arthur Miller, all of 20th century Clifford Odets, the great, the beginnings of the American theater scene began in Connecticut. And so, of course, some of these ideas then began to translate to these Hollywood films. So there is an organic vibe that is in all of these movies. It is a transformational place.
And now we see the watered-down version in 179 Hallmark films every year, where the hard-scrabbled journalist goes back to her hometown and meets the toy maker who also has a Christmas tree farm and quits her job, and
Yes.
basically the step-grandchild of those films,
Yes,
if you will.
the brand. That's our brand.
Melissa, can you talk a little bit about, I know you found some letters, right? Were they the first letters that your father had written to your mother, or some of the earlier ones?
Yeah, well, so they bought my house in 1961, the year I was born. And really, honestly, it does play out exactly what you're saying. Because everybody, I don't know if everybody knows that, like, Lucy Ricardo and Ricky Ricardo moved to Westport in the show. But that our house has very much that vibe of, it's this sort of, people in the 30s would come in and they would do this sort of neo-colonial, very sweet. The rooms were small, kind of rabbit warrens and everything, and the kinds of houses that when movie stars moved out to Connecticut, the kind of houses that movie stars would live in were just these funky old farmhouses, and that we lived with, pots and pan leaks all over the house the whole time I was growing up. And I always said my parents were autists. They didn't care, and they didn't really care about. And when we moved in, we had to open up ceilings, and it was all the same problems. But so my mother lives across the river from us, and we have a footbridge. And so we lived there. My parents lived on the other side, and we had kids. It was so lovely. It's so this third generation growing up in that house. But I went up in my mom's attic, and I reached into a ripped paper bag that was this close to being thrown away. And one day, we thought we had gone through everything, and I reached in, and I found probably the first 10 letters my dad ever wrote to my mother, and they are charmingly bawdy, I would say. And because at first I thought, I'll just, Xerox them and put them in the book. And then as I was reading, I said I had a brief moment where I wasn't going to look at them. And then, I realized I'd be reading and I'd say, oh dear, I can't. So, and then the next, Dad. Yeah, right. Yeah, there's beautiful, like a beautiful quote right in the beginning. It's probably the best quote in the whole book, and I can't even paraphrase it. It's so sweet, but he felt like a ton of bricks. And then the next day I reached in and I found a stack of telegrams that were congratulating my mother for winning the Academy Awards. And I swear to God, that bag was this close to being in the garbage. So yeah, I really, and I feel like things like that keep sprouting in the house too. We found beautiful snapshots on a desk in my mom's, and I said, does anyone know where these came from? And it was like someone had been looking at them, and we don't know where they came from, and no one had ever seen them before. Stunning, and obviously that my parents had taken of each other. That didn't make it into the book, because we found it afterwards, which is, I'm sure you experienced a lot where you were like, why didn't I?
Oh, if I had known you then, I would have begged for more.
Yeah, I know, right?
I drove by in Westport too. I was always very respectful of famous people. It's like they don't want but in Connecticut, and obviously everybody, sort of knows where your parents live and all of that, but yet they're very respectful of their privacy.
I read a story, Melissa, can you confirm this, that this must have been in the 80s when Sylvester Stallone came out for a meeting at the house?
It's a really good, that we knew the guy who was driving for the car service, and after Sylvester Stallone came to the house for a meeting with my dad, who was living in what is now our house, he got in the car, and our friend told us this with his guys, whoever he brought with him, and he goes, "Who would ever think Paul Newman would live in a shit box like that?" And I always said that I want to have it chiseled over the doorway. I consider it a point of pride. And someday I figure he's going to call me and either confirm it or deny it.
I think it's probably true, given I just saw the documentary about Stallone where he sells his house for $58 million to Adele. So, complete with the statues of himself.
I want to see what that house looks like, and yeah. Yeah, we don't have any gold faucets.
But it brings up an interesting point, which I write about in the book, which is people choose to live in Connecticut. Jason Robards chose to live in Connecticut. Richard Widmark left Hollywood. His wife was a writer. He chose to work. He was like a gentleman farmer and worked on a farm. Arthur Miller, again, famously photographs of him farming. And that is where, again, Hollywood sort of sold this idea of suburbia in Connecticut, superior living in Connecticut. So it wasn't just transformational now, it was you were living in the right place with the right kinds of neighbors. And in the beginning of the movie, Cary Grant fantasizes about living in a big mansion. And the whole movie is basically selling you on suburbia. And then as we get past that, that's when the movies begin to shift. But it's this whole idea of everybody deserves a dream house, and my grandfather, who plays their sort of cynical lawyer friend, by the end of the movie, it's like, we'll just keep spending and spending and spending, and somehow it'll all work out, and there's a happy ending.
And it's fascinating. I didn't realize this too, that even back then there were all these product tie-ins and commercialization of it. This is decades ago, get the house like Mr. Blandings.
Well, that's what I wanted to, again, it ties back to Connecticut. When we think of the classic Americana house, the white picket fence, that's Blandings. And so that was created in a real place in New Milford by this, writer, Eric Hodgins. So it's based on his real experience of home building, but then Hollywood took it a step further. But then this genius named Paul McNamara, who worked for David Selznick, came up with the idea to sell kit houses across America. So Blandings houses, just like the fictional house in the movie. In fact, there was a funny story that when they did the plans in the actual movie, there's no upstairs. They just go upstairs. It's just a set. And they started sending plans out, builders across the country. It was like, there's no upstairs in these plans. But so builders around the country, they built 73 Blandings houses, 4 of which exist in Connecticut, and I took pictures of a couple of them.
It's kind of an odd thing, because it'd be like, have a space capsule just like Apollo 13.
Well, because we were selling suburbia. Yeah, and the whole movie, if you look at Blandings, the whole movie is filled with product placement. Kellogg's, and there is the first ever dishwasher is in the movie. GE supplied all the appliances. In fact, they were upset they didn't see enough of their appliances, so they had to go back and reshoot a scene where you saw more of the kitchen. Cary Grant drives a Ford. It's that shift. In the 30s, all the movies everybody goes to Connecticut because they want to be a writer or an artist. In the 40s, suddenly they're all in advertising. Yeah. They all seem to be in advertising. And so it's this idea Subliminal, selling us on the myth, the dream of suburbia.
It's interesting because our house was bought. It was originally it was an old barn that was sort of built with semi-inadequate lumber, anyways. But it was renovated by a set decorator who was unconcerned with permanence. So there are literally beams. Like, you know, if you have the phrase post and beam, both of those words are really important. He took a post out so he could put a couch in. And there's a 12-foot span. We had to kind of jerry-rig stuff when we moved in. They said, don't put a pool table upstairs, you know. But yeah, so it's interesting that it was just, I think it was a well-known, but he was a
decorator.
Yeah, set decorator for stages. Yeah, and so he didn't, yeah. It only had to be up for the run of the show, which is going on and on, yeah.
Well, another interesting thing, too, of course, is your parents working together so often, including your father directing your mother and Rachel, one of the brilliant films of all time. What was that like for home, though? Because you hear a lot of couples saying, don't work together. If it's an actor or director or two actors, you know, that's a surefire way to end the marriage, and yet they work together so often.
I think what happened is that my mother, you know, she won her Academy Award in 1957, made her own dress for the Academy Awards, couldn't afford a dress, only fabric. So look that up, with the jacket lined in green silk with a portrait collar. Joan Crawford said she set fashion back 100 years, and then also sent her a snarky letter, which I found in that bag, which said, congratulations on your award, dear. I've heard of your great willingness to learn. Wow. Nasty. Sorry, wait, the question was...
That's worse than no wire hangers, jeez.
Nasty.
The question was them working together so often, and they bring the work home, obviously.
Right.
That's another layer to having parents who are working together.
Well, so her star was in ascendancy early on, before my dad was even really registering on the radar, and then he just went like that. And so, of all the things with my mother, any difficulties or difficulties that they had, my mother knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that my dad thought she was the most extraordinary actress, the most fascinating woman. And so he really spent the rest of his career finding projects to show the rest of the world how extraordinary she was. I really think that was the motivation for all the work that they did together. And Rachel, we were in Rachel. I was in the classroom scenes. My sister Nell, was in both Rachel and the effect of gamma rays on Man in the Moon Marigolds, both shot in Georgetown and Bridgeport, and all local. To your point, they wanted to just go home, or be able to go home after work, and when my mother was playing Beatrice Hunsdorfer, who is the most unpleasant woman on the planet, just dreadful, and she would bring it home, and it was I think there was a lot of stuff going on, but it was a bad time in the house, when you would come in and you knew your parents, there was something going on, and you don't even have to know, you just come in and you're like, and you scurry up to your room. There was a lot of that during Marigolds, because she was method acting big time.
But yeah, that seems like a formula for a lifetime of therapy for a child, right? Where you're trying to figure out, is mom really mad at dad, or is she really this angry, or is she staying in character? I mean, that's a lot to process.
She would, when she got really mad, and she was tempestuous. We were also super tight. I mean, she said, I'm probably too close to my daughter, so we were all very, very close. But I used to think, wow, Mom, how does she come up with these zingers? And it's just so unfair. And I realized later that she was quoting Tennessee Williams half the time, which I think is an unfair advantage.
Yeah, an arsenal. We're going to open it up to questions in a little bit, but first, we've got some photos. So can we just look at the first one?
Yes, I said photos because it is a photo book. So yes, this is that photograph of my sister.
And the photographers, I mean, my goodness, some of the world's greatest photographers were shooting these pics too. I mean, they're so beautiful.
There are a stunning number of photographs of my dad shaving in the bathroom.
Shaving weirdly, though. Shaving his forehead.
Yeah,
and things like that.
Just Stuart Stern, he's got shaving cream all over his face. Philippe Halsman, we got permission to to put Philippe Halsman back in the picture because he had cropped himself out, and I love the idea of like you can see him in the mirror. And then I think, oh God, there was one other photographer, Gordon Parks, I think, also took a picture of my dad trimming his mustache. Go figure. I don't know what that was all about. But yes, we thought we were going to just empty some frames out into a book, and then the minute we got into it, realized, when your family snapshots are all taken by Richard Avedon, you have to. It's a different process.
And share them with the world.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Let's take a look at the next one.
That's the mom that I know, and that is our sink, and we just replaced the faucet last year. That's the dog.
Yeah, that
It gives a little credence to Stallone's commentary, actually.
Hey, we are,
It's from Connecticut, by the way.
It is. That's the thing. And my mom, she's in between being a movie star running the Westboro Country Playhouse. She was making the French toast. She knew where everybody was. She was schlepping us all to like ballet lessons and, wherever else we had to be. So she really was a superwoman. I got to say, my dad was, he drove race cars, but... And he cooked burgers. We lived on like burgers and, hollandaise sauce. Because my mother could only cook with eggs. Yeah, not bad, right?
Okay, next.
Oh, this is a funny. So this is from Rachel. So there was I found some letters between Stuart Stern, who was the screenwriter, the one who wrote Rebel Without a Cause also wrote, who met my father 12 days before he met my mother, fell in love with my father, was so jealous of my mother, and then eventually he and my mother became besties because they were just so frustrated at loving my dad so much. But my dad evidently didn't want to shoot this scene. There was all this talk where he was uncomfortable. He didn't think it was necessary. He was making all these excuses. And Stuart and Dee Dee Allen, the film editor, everybody worked on this film for nothing. This was a kind of early indie film, and this was really a labor of love. And to my dad's point, we were talking about, theater, the difference between theater making. My dad wanted everyone to come over and barbecue afterwards so that they could all talk about the work and the work.
It's got that vibe.
Yeah, it's very handmade. But anyways, so this is my dad, and I feel like he's saying, keep one foot on the floor and you can touch her here, but you can't touch her here, and you can only use, so that's.
Not at all intimidating for the actor. Okay, let's take a look. What do we have?
Oh, those are the letters and the telegrams, and that's a small. The stack of telegrams is this big, but those are the letters. I know, really, this close to going in the garbage. It would have been so sad.
Think of the fragility of Western Union paper. It's not like this,
It's so.
Heavy stock that it survives.
We should revive telegrams.
It'd be a better way to ghost people by telegram. I don't want to see you. Stop. Stop calling me.
Stop. And that was one of those things where I was watching TV and I was turning the channel and I was like, what is this movie? Where I had never seen it before, which reminds me of my son was at high school and they were showing Philadelphia in the movie Philadelphia in his health class. And he hears Tom Hanks's mother on the phone and he goes, that sounds a lot like my grandma. And he didn't know she was in the movie. He was in school going, wait.
That's incredible. I think do we have one more? Oh, yes. And this
This is The Swimmer.
Such a great movie.
Which also is Westport. And I love the post. I had to put in the poster because the movie was a huge bomb. And in part, it says, when you talk about The Swimmer, will you talk about yourself? Well, the whole movie is about a man who's a complete failure, his wife has left him, his children hate him, he's been taken out of society. And so when people saw the poster, I don't think anybody in 1968 wanted to watch a movie examining their life.
It is so elegantly made, but it's one of the most disturbing movies. I mean, I think I saw it probably 5 or 6 years after it came out as a teenager, and it was it kept me up more than The Exorcist, which I had seen about the same year, just because of you realize as he's literally, he's going to swim home, and you see the reactions from the various, because at first you're like, okay, this is interesting, and then it just gets getting darker and darker, and then just.
Well, it's all because the movie is about these misplaced values. So everything that we'd been preaching in movies, get the big house, get the bigger house, now we're beginning to see the cracks, So it's like the American dream is a scam, And he worked all of his life, and look what it came to. He's a womanizer. He's a drunk. He doesn't pay his bills. It's really a dark film, and Burt Lancaster just is one of my favorite movies. What I love about the film is it's a deconstruction of his own larger-than-life persona. He was 50 years old when he did the film, and going through a divorce, comes to Connecticut, and this was a part he really wanted, which I always thought was kind of interesting. But what I always thought was so strange about the movie is that he's wearing swimming trunks the entire film, and if you look at From Here to Eternity, he's wearing the same swimming trunks. And it's almost, again, like you said, this conscious effort to deconstruct Burt Lancaster, the movie star, and visible scars and all. And it's a very, ugly performance, but brave, very, very brave.
Is that the last slide? Yes, okay. We have a few minutes for questions. We have to get out right on time because the notoriously temperamental and difficult and angry Henry Winkler is coming in, and we have to go out a separate exit. There's a whole thing. His team, it's like, the bodyguards.
I'm going to go pick the green M&Ms out of the...
Yeah, all the contract riders stuff. I mean, he's got some of Taylor Swift's muscle, surrounding him. So, okay. Where's our person with the microphone? There's a person with the microphone right
folks,
there.
if you have a question, please raise your hand nice and high, and a staff member may come around with a microphone for you.
This was terrific. It brings back a lot of memories. And if you keep going a little further up in Connecticut, you get to the Shakespeare Theater in Stratford, where I spend a lot of time. Actually was born up that direction. But anyway, there's lots of movies you could talk about, but Gentleman's Agreement you didn't mention. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's in the book, and obviously a cornerstone of Connecticut cinema, based on a book, Laura Hodgins, and so touchy at the time that the only person who would make it was Daryl Zanuck, who wasn't Jewish. Nobody wanted to touch the movie. So it's about covenants in Connecticut and trying to keep blacks and Jews out, which was still going on up until, as I write, 1968 with the Fair Housing Act. Gentlemen's Agreements, quiet, an incredible film, directed by Elie Kazan, which he did back-to-back with a film called Boomerang, which is another really wonderful, interesting film.
Double microphone, nicely done.
Now, I'm from Brookfield, Connecticut, and growing up...
Wait a minute, what's going on here?
But growing up, Newman, the whole Newman name meant class. So I would like to have you talk about, a lot of people maybe not know or know the charity aspects of the Newmans and, Joanne Woodward and Paul Newman, what they did and they continue to do. And I think it's such an important part of who they were, in my opinion.
That was an incredible gift that we were given, honestly, that I say, if I make $4.75 from this book, there's no doubt in my mind that whatever my personal, will go to charitable causes, because it wouldn't seem right to me to make money off a book of my parents' images, which, they are the gift of the book. They, as I said, the hole-in-the-wall camps are probably the best iteration of my father's. There are 30 camps all over the world. It's a place where kids are flinging their prosthetics legs on the ground and, doing the climbing wall, or saying there's like, I can't swim because I have a port. And we're like, we plug you up, we roll you right in your wheelchair. It's so extraordinary. If you want a happy moment, go online and look up the Healing Feeling videos for Hole in the Wall. The salad dressing company gave away I think $500 million. He said with the salad dressing, why, if I make $4.75 for my salad dressing, I'll give it away. And later, I don't think I'm going to have that kind of success, but I'll take what I can get. But yeah, the gift was that in our family, that's what we do. Our son is, he's teaching and under really difficult circumstances. A lot of kids that have just come into the country, and our kids, he's worked at the Hole in the Wall, and so it's such a gift to have that. Given that we are so blessed, And my dad always said, my son has on a tattoo that says luck is an art in my dad's handwriting because he wrote that to my mom. So just saying. I don't know if that really answers your question, but thank you for that opportunity.
I was just curious, how do these small idyllic towns in Connecticut maintain their authenticity and not like get overrun by Kardashians and
They
people like
don't.
that? Oh, is it all changing?
I think that's always the battle. You have some little towns like Stonington and that remain, Chester, Connecticut, which I write about, which remain sort of little snapshots, Essex, Connecticut, and then other towns like Waterbury, Stamford, they do change and become metropolises.
I think, in Westport, we probably have the smallest house on our street. And what's so crazy is that the people that moved in, the real estate agents would use my parents as a way to get people to move. That you can live, and then they would build these enormous houses. And there was a man who did a lot of that and took old houses and just, knocked them down or bastardized them so much. And he was walking down the street once. This students just stay in this room, okay? But he was walking down the street once, and my mother and father were walking up the road, and he had just, so many houses on their road. And he said, oh, and he went to shake their hand. And they were the most gracious people in the world. My father wouldn't shake his hand, and my mother burst into tears and walked down the driveway. It's like, so, my mother used to walk up and down the road, and she'd pick up garbage. She'd dress like a bag lady, and she'd be picking up garbage and stuff like that. She was my mom.
I love that. Let's do two more. I think we have time. Got a few more minutes.
Of the Connecticut movies that you surveyed in your book, what percentage of you would you say were actually shot in Connecticut, and how many were Hollywood's idea of what Connecticut is?
It's sort of a mix and match. All the early films were obviously all done in Hollywood. As you get into the 40s and 50s, going on location, especially with a film like Boomerang, that's when you were actually able to go on location. So pretty much from 1947 on, a lot of them were shot in Connecticut, then you do have the 60s sex comedies, which were shot in Hollywood with maybe one or two scenes in Connecticut. But I would say a large majority of them are on location. And going back to the silent era, that's what was surprising to me, how many, people think of New Jersey and silent films, but many silent films, including Way Down East, scenes from Way Down East were filmed in Connecticut.
And to that earlier question about preserving Connecticut, there obviously has to be some enclaves, because then in the 2000s or so, we got films that were set in the 50s, but were filmed, Revolutionary Road.
Right, a lot of those, I call them like dark suburbia redux, which is a sort of a modern, taking a modern lens, doing movies from the past, and these are all really dark. They're actually darker than the dark suburbia films of the 50s and 60s, but they're all shot on location.
The ice storm question, that's featured in the book.
Yeah, the ice storm is New Canaan, which is a beautiful, sleepy little town, and that is in the film. That's one of the movies that is a sort of a re-examination of a very famous real event, the ice storm. Were you around during the actual ice storm?
I think I probably was.
It was a major event in our childhood. I remember it was terrifying.
Back when there was snow.
I think on that note, we're going to thank everybody for being such a terrific audience. And Melissa Newman, Illeana Douglas, if you haven't had a chance to get their books, please do. They're amazing, great books. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.